Is Daniel chapter 2 and chapter 7 a prophecy about an Islamic kingdom? Many Muslim apologists have been using this prophecy to show how Islam is true and it comes from God. However, I'm going to show how their argument falls short when you take in consideration all the aspects of the prophecy. First off, I'm going to try to steelman their argument based off how I've heard Muslim apologists say it. Their argument is basically that Daniel's prophecy shows four successive kingdoms, which was Babylon, Medes and Persia, Greece, and Rome. And they say since the fourth kingdom was divided, it had to have come after the division of Rome in the 4th century. Then a fifth kingdom is going to come that God is going to establish and bring all the previous ones to an end, and this new kingdom will be the dominant world power. And since the Muslim Ottoman Turks defeated the Eastern Roman Byzantine Empire in 1453, they say that this Islamic kingdom must have been the one that was prophesied in Daniel that God would establish. And they argue that this would make Islam true since God established it and prophesied its coming. On the surface, this seems like a very convincing argument if you've never actually read the entire prophecy. I'm going to go through all the major details of this prophecy and show you how the entire prophecy cannot be talking about a historical Islamic kingdom. In Daniel chapter 2, King Nebuchadnezzar has a dream where he sees a vision of an image, and it says in verse 32 that the head of this image was of fine gold, its chest and arms of silver, its middle and thighs of bronze, its legs of iron, its feet partly of iron and partly of clay. And then it says in verse 34 that a stone was cut by no human hand, and it struck the image on its feet of iron and clay and broke them in pieces. And the dream concludes in verse 35 where it says, the stone that struck the image became a great mountain and filled the whole earth. And as I said earlier, Daniel interprets this image as four successive kingdoms, which concludes with Rome at the end. But I want to focus on the nature of the feet of iron and clay and the stone that was cut by no human hand. Daniel describes what the feet of iron and clay represent in verses 41 and 42, where it says, it shall be a divided kingdom, but some of the firmness of iron shall be in it, just as you saw iron mixed with the soft clay, and as the toes of the feet were partly iron and partly clay, so the kingdom shall be partly strong and partly brittle. So Daniel defines the division of the kingdom as it being weakened. It says it will be partly strong and partly brittle, but it never says the one kingdom will turn into two kingdoms. So the fifth kingdom doesn't have to come after the fourth kingdom was divided into two, it just had to come after there was division. And anybody who knows anything about Roman history, this literally could have been at any time. Rome was constantly divided and always fighting against itself with many civil wars throughout their history. But when Rome was at its strongest was when it was a republic. However, one of the most notable times of division came in the 1st century BC between Julius Caesar and Pompey. And then after Caesar was assassinated, this led to even more division and a civil war between Mark Antony and Augustus Caesar. And the result of that civil war was the end of the Roman Republic as it had existed for 750 years before that, and eventually turned into the Roman Empire. And this empire system didn't bring stability, but constant power struggles and people trying to usurp the throne. The most notable of this was in 69 AD, which was the year of the 4 emperors. But all that is to say that Rome did not have to be split into two kingdoms in order for there to be division and weakness in the kingdom. And the clay was at the feet of the image, which was the foundation, and this really shows that the image was on a weak foundation and was bound to end. Concerning the stone that was cut by no human hand, it's important to note that this stone was not part of the image that came before it. It was something that was separate, divine in nature, and had no human origin since it was cut by no human hand. See, the kingdoms that were part of that image were pagan and came to power through the sword and through conquest and through human military might. But this stone, which signified the new kingdom, was going to be different and utterly unique from all the other kingdoms that came before it. Daniel also goes on to say in verse 44 about this fifth kingdom that the God of heaven will set up a kingdom that shall never be destroyed, nor shall the kingdom be left to another people. It shall break in pieces all these kingdoms and bring them to an end, and it shall stand forever. So this kingdom that was coming was going to replace the previous kingdoms, be established by God, and shall stand forever. And when this happens, this kingdom is going to start small and eventually fill the whole world. Now some questions here are, how are the previous kingdoms going to be shattered? When was this going to happen? And who is going to be the king of this new kingdom? Well, when we go to Daniel 7, it gives a lot more details of this prophecy that Muslim apologists often ignore. In Daniel 7, Daniel gets a vision of his own, but instead of an image, he sees 4 beasts that signify the 4 kingdoms. And the 4th beast had 10 horns, which draws back to the feet from the image that had 10 toes. And verse 8 describes another horn where it says, I considered the horns, and behold, there came up among them another horn, a little one, before which 3 of the first horns were plucked up by the roots. And behold, in this horn were eyes like the eyes of a man, and a mouth speaking great things. And verses 24 and 25 give more detail about the nature of these horns and who they were, where it says, As for the 10 horns, out of this kingdom 10 kings shall arise, and another shall arise after them. He shall be different from the former ones, and shall put down 3 kings. He shall speak words against the Most High, and shall wear out the saints of the Most High, and shall think to change the times and the law, and they shall be given into his hand for a time, times, and half a time. So there will be 10 kings, and then another king will arise from among them, and wage war against the saints for 3.5 years. Then in verse 11 it talks about the beasts and the horns will be destroyed, but then in verse 12 it says, as for the rest of the beasts, their dominion was taken away, but their lives were prolonged for a season and a time. So the nature of their destruction wasn't that they were going to cease to exist entirely, since it says that their lives were prolonged, but that their dominion was going to be taken away. We see this reiterated in verse 26, but then it says in verse 27 that, and the kingdom and the dominion and the greatness of the kingdoms under the whole heaven shall be given to the people of the saints of the Most High. His kingdom shall be an everlasting kingdom, and all dominion shall serve and obey him. The 5th kingdom that God was going to establish was going to come after the dominion was taken away from the previous kingdoms. And this new kingdom was going to have dominion that came from God and was going to last for forever, and it was going to belong to the saints of the Most High. But who is going to be king of this kingdom? Daniel sees another vision in verses 13 and 14 which say, and behold, with the clouds of heaven there came one like a son of man, and he came to the Ancient of Days and was presented before him. And to him was given dominion and glory and a kingdom, that all peoples, nations, languages should serve him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion which shall not pass away, and his kingdom one that shall not be destroyed. So this Son of Man figure was to rule over this kingdom and would also be divine in nature, and I say this for a couple of reasons. For one, it says how he will be coming on the clouds, which is something only Yahweh does, as it says in Deuteronomy chapter 33, verse 26. And it says how all peoples will serve him, and that word for serve, especially when it's used in Daniel, is always used for serving a deity. And his kingdom was an everlasting kingdom. He was going to rule for forever, so he had to be an eternal being in order for him to be able to rule for forever. And his kingdom is described just like God's kingdom in Daniel chapter 6, verse 26. So this Son of Man couldn't have been just a regular human being, but he had to also be divine in nature. So in order for there to be this 5th kingdom, there had to be the Son of Man to be the king of this kingdom. Let's look back at the Muslim argument about the Islamic kingdom being the 5th kingdom and see how it fits in with all of this. Now remember, they say that this kingdom had to come after the division of Rome, which as I said earlier doesn't necessitate there being a split between East and West. But their Islamic kingdom does come after there was division, so that would fit. However, their main argument on why their kingdom fulfilled this prophecy was that they ended the 4th kingdom, which was the Roman Empire, in its entirety. There are a few problems with this. I already showed that this wasn't how the 5th kingdom was supposed to destroy the previous kingdoms. And the Muslim Ottoman Turks only defeated the Eastern Roman Empire in 1453, and by that time, that empire was a shell of its former self. As you can see in this picture, this was Rome at the height of its empire. And then this is the Eastern Byzantine Empire at the height of their empire. And this is what was left of the Eastern Byzantine Empire by the time the Islamic Ottoman Turks defeated them. So when they say they defeated Rome, Rome had already been defeated by many other nations by the time the Islamic Turks came to them. They just gave the final blow. And if they're going to argue that they were the ones that defeated Rome, they never even defeated the Western Roman Empire. As you can see from this map, they never even gained control of that land, even at the height of their empire. And the Western Empire fell to the Goths from the north in 476 AD. Then it was partially revived in 800 AD and lasted till 1806 AD until the French Revolution. So using their logic, the French were actually the ones who fulfilled the prophecy since they ended Rome and not the Muslims. As you can see, this isn't a great argument because it's often hard to tell when and who ended Rome officially. Another important thing to note is the Islamic Ottoman Empire didn't last for forever. That empire fell after World War I and no longer exists, so this couldn't have been the 5th kingdom since it didn't last for forever. And according to the prophecy, when the 5th kingdom destroyed the 4th kingdom, it was to start small and eventually fill the whole world. But the Ottoman Empire was already a very large empire by the time it defeated the Byzantines. Also, who was the 10 horns and the little horn that was persecuting the saints when they defeated Rome? I've never really heard a sufficient answer that really addressed that. But most importantly, who is the divine Son of Man who is king over that Islamic kingdom? If the Islamic kingdom was the 5th kingdom, then we should have seen and should still see this Son of Man being king of that kingdom today. If not, then the Islamic kingdom could not have been the 5th kingdom without the divine Son of Man as king. So with all that, it's very clear that a historical Islamic kingdom did not fulfill the Daniel prophecy. Follow me for my next video where I'll show what kingdom fulfilled this prophecy.